Good morning and welcome to this special edition of the Cover One Buffalo podcast. I am your host, and as it feels like, as always, I'm being joined by my guy here, Cody Alexander. Cody, how you doing this morning, my bud?
Doing great. Trying to stay warm and stay healthy.
Yeah, it's tougher up here in Western New York to stay warm this time of year. I don't want to tell you what my heat and electric bill were this past month, but it was astounding. So we're trying to get the warm. Although Puxatawny Phil has seen his shadow, so it sounds like we at least have 6 more weeks of this nasty weather coming up. But Bills fans are warming up to the idea of this staff being put together here, Cody. And this was one that we're going to talk about today with the addition of Jim Leonhard to this staff. That the second this news sort of hit that they were even interested, I got right into your DMs and was like, hey, dude, if this does go down, we got to go and talk a little bit of ball. So just kind of the big picture here. I know you've got a lot of content on MatchQuarters, kind of talking about him and some of the stuff. What just from the big picture, Bills fans, I know we're familiar with him, having been here. We had Rex Ryan, just the kind of the big picture of what to expect from Jim Leonhard as a coach.
Well, the one thing that I think you said is like, hey, is this an Aranda style defense that he comes from? He's actually more of a Wilcox, so a Justin Wilcox style. So it is kind of that tight front base. So it is an odd structure. So you're going to have a 3-4 base defense. He's more of a cover 3 guy. And I think, too, if you really watch the Broncos, I know that Vance Joseph had talked about this before. It looks a lot like cover 1, but they really have a way of playing a man side and a zone side. That's kind of always been what he's done. I thought where he was ahead of the curve on everybody was when everybody was starting to transfer over at the college level to a lot of these creeper sim pressures, basically blitzing, but only sending 4. He had them all packaged out. He had a way to attack the back, the tight end, open side, closed side, passing strength, away from the pack. These were all packaged the way that you could do this. And he really leaned into the peso package part of that, which is the peso package is basically the 4-down version of the tight front. So he was ahead of the curve. And where I always thought there was a lot of signal, he always led the country in 3rd down percentage. And so to me, when you do that, not only are you winning in 3rd, but that signals that you're winning on early down. So I think that you have basically he's a football nerd and he loves defense, and he is a very good coach in being able to get these kind of complex ideas taught to the players.
So there's a couple things I want to unpack in that opening statement here. One, it's really fun for me to look at a guy's tree. But when you look at his tree, it really is like there is some Aranda, there is some Wilcox, there is some Wade Phillips, Vance Joseph, but he's like, you go online and look at his seminars and stuff. This guy is just a football nerd and he's pulling from everywhere, right? And so like the tree itself is kind of hard. It's got a lot of branches to it, and I don't think he's done adding. Can you kind of talk about just his experience from, being a pro under Rex Ryan and being perfect fit for that aggressive style defense, but that aggression is got that kind of Wilcox analytical. It's not just crazy aggression all the time. It's really kind of playing around with QB's heads and kind of being patient with that aggression.
Yeah, and I think that to me is really where he's at. You kind of have, I think a lot of times you have the coverage structure of like the Rex Ryan cover 3 with they're really trying to make sure that they have layers in the middle of the field. There's match coverage on one side, there's zone on the other, that we're playing sticky when they do get out. I think the other thing too with him is blitzing, but not like, blitz just to blitz or just it's in our DNA of where we're going to be high blitz rate. I really don't think that, yes, the Broncos had a higher blitz rate. I don't necessarily think that translates. I think if you look at any kind of signal from the Broncos, just speaking of history, we can kind of go in reverse. The safety pressures this year, the early part of this year, they were kind of non-existent. And then all of a sudden they started using Hufanga near the box, really as kind of like a sniper against the run, adding in on some of these early down passing downs. And then all of a sudden you just start seeing like, okay, the evolution of this defense. I also think too, part of this, transition for him. The Wade Phillips system of where we're really going to play shades instead of playing head up, I think it's also going to be interesting. Does he bring that with him, or does he go back to more of the Aranda style of play of where we're going to play head up on people, kind of that Fangio style of playing more head up, more gap and a half, or are we going to really try and force the issue in the gap? And then part of that, like you mentioned, Wilcox is really an underrated coach. He doesn't get talked enough at the college level of somebody that kind of stems or went parallel with Aranda, using a lot of the tight front, but getting more into kind of even structures, meaning that we're going to have open B gaps, getting into that peso package world, the kind of running a heavy cover 3, not necessarily leaning into quarters. That Aranda really likes quarters. I think Wilcox really likes cover 3. I know from just personal experience, Leonard's not a big quarters guy.
Yeah.
Interesting too, just a side note, a little tangent here.
Yeah.
NFL guys, especially from his generation, will tell you they hate quarters. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that coaches were trying to just play like umbrella quarters and didn't have all the rules. Yeah. And so it's not the collegiate quarters. And so it's just a really interesting mix. But that really is, if you look at his tree, is the Rex Ryan, Wilcox, and then Vance Joseph are going to be kind of the 3 big heads. And it will be interesting who he hires as his D-line coach, which I think will kind of tell you where they're going that way.
Yeah, one thing that is going to be a very frustrating conversation, I think, for content creators, beat guys here this year, is a switch from 3-4 to 4-3. And I think you get a lot of fans that just kind of look at Madden, or they think of the early 2000s even, where it was much more a very different type of front. I know you mentioned the tight fronts. But also talk about we're going to see a lot of sub packages, right? We're going to see a lot of 5-6 DBs on here. So the idea that it's a 3-4 or 4-3, I don't think makes a ton of difference. Can you talk about how in modern football that it's more about front spacing than it is the structure of 3 or 4?
Right. And you hit it. So if you're sitting here and you're like, yeah, great, that's great. What is spacing? Odd spacing means that we're closing the B gaps. Okay, there is no B gap bubble. There's no open B gap. Even spacing means that there is a B gap bubble. We really don't talk about the A gap. I know in the NFL you will get some A gap runs, but most everything is trying to hit off tackle or into that B gap. And really in modern football, the B gap is the fulcrum of the defense and the offense. How you protect that open B gap, or do you close it with odd spacing? Do you keep it open with even? How do you mitigate that? So that is kind of your starter. The 3-4 is just, what am I installing on day one? That's what I'm installing on day one. If you ask anybody that installs like a cover 3 or anything like that, the traditional way to do it is always to do it off of 21 personnel. I know now in modern football, everybody kind of flipped for about a decade. We always work spread and then work to condense, I think now. But in the NFL, you've always had a condensed. You've always had 21, 12, all those things. So 3-4 is the base package. That's where all of our fit structures are going to come from. That's where our base coverage structures are going to come from. That's your day one install. So the moment that these players show up, so the first time they do football school in the offseason with Leonard involved and the defensive involved, those guys are going to base out of a 3-4. I will say this: he lived in the peso package, which is basically a 2-4, basically a 2-4-5 is what it was. So what does that mean? When he was there, he had Herbig, he had Sanborn, he had the Becton inside. So like he had NFL dudes, but
Vaughn was there at one point.
Yes. So I think like if you look at it, he was a base 3-4. Now, his creepers and sims get you into odd spacing. So that's important to note. So his blitz structure fits with his fit structure. And that's where this whole ecosystem lives. And so to your point, the Bills have been basically a 4-2-5, 4-3 defense, kind of single gap fit. Mm-hmm. We're kind of jet in the front because we have really quick defensive linemen. So everybody's got a gap. If the gap moves, I move with it. That's going to change a little bit under Leonard because it's going to be more odd spacing. We're going to see a little bit more pressures like you see kind of from the Ravens crew where we're getting more simulated pressures, or Fangio with more simulated pressures. You don't know where it's going to come from, even regardless of whether we have an odd front or an even front on the field.
Yeah, and so in that, I know this was a interesting conversation we had before the season last year with some of the new pieces the Bills added. Obviously, Michael Hoecht is a guy that's going to be recovering from an Achilles, but man, I hope that is a quick recovery, because I think this defense is even a better fit for where he could be utilized in. You talked about maybe even moving Ed Oliver out a little bit more. Talk about some of the guys, Cole Bishops, Dorian Williams. I know that there's a lot of kind of roster turnover that's probably going to happen on the defensive side of the ball, but I think Bills fans are worried. You've had this structure of a Sean McDermott defense for so long. You're going to have all these pieces that don't fit a new structure, but I don't know that that's true. And I think some of them can actually benefit from the changes that we're about to see. Can you maybe highlight some of the guys that you think will thrive in a defense like this?
Well, I'll say this too. I think that there is a little bit of signal if you go and you look at who's good defensively, okay, and then how are they structured. The Broncos are interesting because that's where he's come from. I'm going to start there. They're interesting because they are really light at edge, but those guys don't drop into coverage very often. They will use them. I mean, Benito covered linebacker, like running backs out of the backfield. And we saw that against the Patriots early in the game. So there will be times that they're asked to do that.
Some of that hook stuff.
Right. But it's more or less what those guys are. They're called bonus drops. And so they're really just vision drops and just trying to be basically a mosquito in that window right there in the seam of just the quarterback's kind of looking. And it's like, well, there's a guy hanging there. Maybe he looks like he's hovering there, and I'm going to try and rip it in there. And then I get the batted ball, and quarterbacks hate that. And so I think, like, to me, that's where that structure is going to come from. I think if you look at the roster, you probably don't have a guy where you feel comfortable dropping him into coverage other than Hoecht, but you do have guys that can be a solid edge. What they're probably going to do is stand up instead of putting their hand in the dirt. Bosa's already played in a 3-4 with Mentor, so he knows, and Staley. So I mean, he knows how to do this. I mean, this isn't anything, and that doesn't necessarily mean that these guys are dropping into coverage. It's kind of the old, with Fangio, with Von Miller, like, he's the best edge rusher in the league in his prime. Why am I dropping him into coverage? You do it more as like a bait and switch or like a change-up throw in the game, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to drop. And I think that's the important thing. The 4-down front's not going to disappear. I mean, Leonard at Wisconsin was more of a 4-down front guy and in his nickel package. So I don't think that that's necessarily going to disappear. I do think to your point, like guys on this, like I think Cole Bishop kind of being a hybrid safety, being able to play back, being able to play near the box, being able to be a blitzer near the box kind of adds that. So think of what Hufanga was doing with the Broncos. I think he can fit in there as well. You do have two athletic linebackers. I do think, though, that you're probably, because you are in an odd structure, probably need to go get a traditional kind of an A-gap linebacker. They're usually cheap too. So
Sanborn is one that like rips off the top of my head. That could probably be a good deal.
Oh yeah, Sanborn's another one. If the Packers want let Walker walk, the Quay Walker would be another really good one that comes from a hybrid defense anyway. The Georgia defense is a base 3-4. He's perfect in the A gap. So yeah, there's going to be guys that are out there, and they're going to be relatively cheap because, let's be honest, an A gap linebacker in today's game is not a guy that you're paying $20 million for. You need a guy like a Fred Warner that's going to just be dynamic and is going to go out there and make plays in the run game, but also be able to make plays in the passing game. So I think there is good. The defensive line, you probably are going to have to go find a nose guard. Like that's probably priority. It's going to have to come probably earlier in the draft than later. Those guys, again, don't come later in the draft. You can hit a few. Poona Ford is one of those, but I think he got knocked because, he's like 5'11". But he's also like, he did the Matrix the other day against the Seahawks. So it's like, he's also an alien.
You think Jalen Walker I know he's the size is a little wonky, but I know they had him at One Tech a little bit this year, obviously a different front, but he seemed to handle his own in that role.
Yeah, and I think those guys can grow. I think, again, I just am saying you're going to need some depth inside other than just, hey, we have one nose guard on our team. great. You need to have about 2 of them. And then you need to have some hybrid guys, which I think the front already has it. You mentioned Ed Oliver. Ed Oliver can play everything from a 3 to a 5.
Mhm.
So they could even have situations where they need to be a little bit more beefy outside. They can use him as kind of that big 5, move him out. You can start moving guys around. That's where those packages are really going to come in, just because he's going to find where those guys need to be and how can I leverage the opponent that we're playing. And some weeks he may be inside the whole time because they need a quick 3. They need somebody stacked on a guard. Other times he may move outside because they feel like they need to have a little bit more of a heavier presence on the outside. They need a more traditional defensive end, that's pushing 280, 290 instead of the kind of what we see now with the 240, 250 pounders.
Yeah, and on the back end, obviously they also added Valet as the cornerbacks coach, which I really loved. But you talked about some of that cover 3 where it almost looks like cover 1. Benford, Harrison on the outside, do you think that they can get the job done in the way that Jim Leonard wants?
I think so. Look, Benford to me is one of the more underrated. I know I've talked to you about this. Like, he's one of the more underrated corners in the NFL. I think Harris Maxwell, year 2, field corner, being able to open up, really play, being able to watch how kind of White played and got better this year, especially at an older age. They're different body types too, though. To me, Maxwell Harrison is a perfect field corner. He's elite speed, really long. He can open up and run. I think he will serve perfectly fine. And then you can have your bully into the boundary in Benford. And I think the nice thing too is, like, Benford knows how to blitz. He knows how to come off the edge. So it's another added layer to that boundary call that you can get. So I do think your corner spots are pretty good. And then obviously I think your nickel, you have one of the better nickels in the NFL when healthy. I think that keeping him healthy is going to be key again this year, because I do expect them to play a lot of nickel.
Yeah, I do think they have to probably get ready for the future beyond Terrence.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you there.
And they got to find that spot. But that is going to be an important aspect of this. And that kind of brings me to a next point here. You talked about the third down packages, and I was reading one of your articles talking about that 2019 Rose Bowl performance. So I went and looked at that game. And it's a shame that they weren't able to win that game, because the defense did its job. And a quarterback that everybody's familiar with at the time at the college level, Justin Herbert, he did not have any idea what he was looking at on these third downs. And you saw a lot of 6 defensive back looks. So, like, again, this whole conversation about, 3-4 and all that, we're still going to see heavy sub packages here. Can you talk about, the Bills really struggled in the Sean McDermott era on 3rd and longs. They were able to get some teams in 3rd and longs, but you saw it against the Broncos. They needed a 3rd and long stop. Bo Nix puts one right in the seam, wide open, 10 yards of coverage around here. That kind of stuff isn't going to happen in your Jim Leonard defense, right?
Yeah, and I think the problem there is just you're not changing the picture for the offense a lot of times with the Bills on 3rd down. It was, you're not, okay, well, you can mug the linebackers or something, but you know where the 5 guys are going to be. You're not really bringing in a dime package because you don't really have that either dime back or the 3rd corner that you really need, so you can put Taron Johnson in as the dime. I think, like, projecting to the Super Bowl, one of the things that Seattle does really well is, there's times where Witherspoon and Eamon are both inside. So then you have Woolen outside. Now that's going to change after this year, because I think they're going to let Woolen walk. But my point to that is, yeah, he has a way of getting into different packages. I think too, if you ask most NFL coaches now, like especially the passing game coordinators, are like, look, if we can get into dime and survive a lot of these, like 3rd down or even these long 2nd downs, like they would love to be in that, just because it does get a lot of speed on there. It also changes the way that you can run some of your coverage structure. So yeah, he's always had, and I said that at the top of the show, like, he's always had one of the best 3rd down defenses. And I think, to me, like, you even project over to the Broncos, like that, the Broncos had one of the better 3rd down defenses. And so I really don't think for a second, like, him and Vance Joseph would have loved to be in those DB meetings, because those 2 guys know how to put a defensive backfield together. Vance Joseph, obviously knowing kind of the Wade Phillips, that to me is going to be the key on 3rd down. And then on base downs of, like, how much of that package is he going to bring with him, or is he going to go back to what he was doing at Wisconsin, which is more of kind of that tight front mentality instead of that gap mentality?
And then one last one for you here. The pretty much the really Achilles heel of the Sean McDermott defense here for the last few years is if you were willing to commit to the run, they would let you do it. And because of being a little bit smaller up front, they push you around. I go in the couple of years here watching the Broncos defense, and you look at the analytics for the Broncos defense, what they were able to do against the run, absolutely elite level. Do you think the run game integrity here, obviously Bills were like 28th, most DVOA stats were at the bottom of the league here. Is that something that is going to change without having to add in additional guys into the box in this new front type system?
Well, I think that that's where some people deviated because, especially in the AFC, because of Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes, is that you just say, I don't care. Neither one of those teams are going to run the ball. And when they do run it, it's literally just like, hey, we got to give Joe Burrow a break, or hey, we need Patrick Mahomes to just sit still for a second so he can get a break. So I think what happened, and I've mentioned this to you multiple times, is just the meta flip on the Bills and that defense that was perfectly primed to stop those two offenses. Well, it ended up that those two offenses weren't going to be the ones that were headed into the playoffs. And so I think Leonard comes from to that tree as well and just kind of that philosophy. Mike McDonald, and I go back to Seattle because I think they're the best example of like, how do you put together a nickel defense in the modern football and then live in it? Yeah, the players matter, but his mantra is, especially for those front guys, to stop the run, to have some fun. So if you want to have fun on third down, or you want to have fun on a 2nd and long, you better have your technique perfect, and you better fit your gap. You better know where you're supposed to be in your run fit, and you better stop the run. If you kill the run, you create a drop back passing game. When you create a drop back passing game, who gets to have a lot of fun in that? That's the defensive line and the linebacker. So, and two, DBs are paid to cover. They want to cover guys. And so I think that's kind of that whole mantra. I think that football's not hard. We make it really complex, though. If you stop the run, and it doesn't matter at any level, if you stop the run and you force that team to throw 40 times out of the game, you're probably going to win that game. Just because now you flip the script, you own every single down. If they don't get that pass on 1st down, it's now 2nd and long. Guess what? We own that down now too. Now you can start leaning into your sub packages, your coverage rotations, your blitz packages that we know that Leonard has from his time at Wisconsin. So to me, I think that's the big thing. It's philosophically, everything has to start with understanding your run fit, fitting the run. We want to at least be in the top half of the league in run defense. If you're in the bottom half of the league, you're going to be in trouble. You may look, the Eagles were able to go to a Super Bowl, but they weren't able to win the game because the Chiefs were able to run their 4-minute offense like they always do. And so I think like that's the key, right? Is we have to be elite at stopping the run. If we can do that, it changes the whole game for us. And then it really amplifies what we can do on the front end.
So I said that was my last one. I do have one more because you talked about how it's a complex game, and there has, as good of a coach as Sean McDermott has been, and I do think he doesn't get enough credit for some of the progressive things he led in the NFL on the defensive side of the ball. However, I know from talking to people, when the game got bigger, when the moment got bigger, he overcoached a lot of those moments. And I think, as a coach who's been around players, you can't overcoach these guys. You have to allow them to play fast. You have to simplify the game for these guys and allow them to play within the structure of the defense. And I think some people will look at the Rex Ryan tree of Jim Leonhard, another guy I think in times got almost in his own head of, we're going to overcoach this, and my scheme and my blitzes and what I want them to do is going to be so good. But then you had players that just weren't playing quick. They were just playing to the scheme. Jim Leonhard, though, back to that Wilcox tree, I think, can you at least encourage fans that he's not going to make this, while it's a complicated thing and he's going to present a lot of looks, he's not going to overcomplicate it for the players and allow them to play fast?
Yeah, it's in the same mold of what Mike McDonald has done. I know I keep going back to Seattle, but look, it's the same philosophy of what they're trying to do with the Ravens 2.0 system that he basically created. Think of Wink Martindale as Rex Ryan in that sense of he's the old established coach. He's very aggressive up front, likes to run a lot of man coverage. But in the modern game, especially, we have to admit the spread won, and it's not going back. We got teams in 12 and 13 personnel that are trying to get into these heavy packages to throw the ball,
pull everybody back,
not to run. And people even talk about it. Let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks again. Is they have one of the highest run rates in the NFL. They're not really that great at running. So why do they keep doing it? Because it's inviting you down into the box. The Patriots are going to do the exact same thing. They're going to get into their 6 linemen. I mean, the Bills did it. We're going to get you into these base packages, and then we're gonna let Josh Allen throw the ball outside. So I think like when you look at what Leonard has done, going under Wilcox, and then having that Rex Ryan, when you talk to players from his generation that are now starting to get their spots, they're kind of in their mid 30s to mid 40s. They're getting their spots. They're now becoming coordinators. They're now in charge of calling defense. One of the things that is really kind of coming out from that generation is just that, look, I'm going to give you all the information, and I'm going to put you in the spot that you're supposed to be. It's going to look complex to the offense, but it's going to be easy for us. I think like it's that modular style of defense. I call it like interchangeable parts, right?
Yep.
Like I'm taking this technique from this call and we're putting it into this call. I don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. It's basically like, hey, when we have this call, hey, do you remember in this coverage you're going to do that? Yeah. Okay. It's the same technique. I'm teaching techniques, not necessarily teaching. So it's a more holistic way of teaching defense. Then everything is a different bucket. Everything is a different call. Everything is another wheel that we just created. And it's like, hey, we already have a wheel. Let's use the wheel. Yeah. Maybe we have one less spoke on it, but it's still a wheel and it still goes around. So to me, when you look at Jim Leonhard, what he was able to do at Wisconsin, that was a very complex on the outside. But then when you start looking at it, you're like, oh, wait, he's running the same blitz patterns. He's just attacking the different areas on the field. Maybe he uses a safety. Maybe he uses a linebacker. You would be shocked if I showed you, like even for the Ravens, so like the Seattle or even Mentor, who's going to be with the Ravens, their blitz calls are super simple.
Yeah.
It's just
infinite.
Yes. It's who's going. Think about it. It's a simple math problem. Who do you, in a 3-4, you have 4 linebackers, right? You have 2 safeties and you have 2 corners. You're not going to blitz. You're not going to blitz the field corner, right? So you're going to blitz. You can blitz the boundary corner. Well, that gives you right then and there enough guys. You have 10 guys that can, can rush at any time.
Yeah.
Then you have a different tags for where you want those guys to hit, A, B, C gap, D gap, wherever. Well, then now you're just multiplying. So it's a multiplier. Yeah. And then it's
really 7 of them and you don't know where.
Exactly. And so that's kind of where that modular style of defense comes in. And that's where Leonhard is. It's going to be, the blitzing patterns might be complex. The coverage behind it's probably not going to be complex. Guys are going to know where they're supposed to be. And I do agree with you, like in a sense of you can overcomplicate some things, but I think him having been a former player and then also kind of having evolved through that, worked under some different guys that have different styles. And, the Broncos defense wasn't that complex either. It just was, they knew where to put their leverage points. And so I think like if he can bring that to the Bills and you can use some of the talent that you already have on there, I think that you can get into that upper echelon of the defenses in the NFL.
I love it, man. Well, hey, I know you're a busy dude. Let the people know again what they can expect from you. If you are somebody that loves these kind of conversations, I highly suggest that you go subscribe to MatchQuarters. Just the data dumps that you do during the season, all these, whenever I see something happening for the Bills, I go right to your site, and there's always something in there that I learn. And so let people know what kind of content you've got coming up this offseason.
Yeah. So matchquarters.com, this is Super Bowl week. So I have this, it's a beast. I spent all last week on it. I got ahead so I could just work on this all last week. I have, there are things in there that nobody else is going to talk about. And then I'll have the podcast, Let's Talk Ball, out on Wednesday. We'll talk about the matchups. Thursday is how the Seahawks can attack the Patriots defense. That'll be on YouTube and MatchQuarters, so you can watch that. And then Friday, I have a cut-up article of how basically the Patriots need to throw the ball. I know that a lot of people tell them to not do it, but I'm going to show you exactly how they're going to be able to do that with the Seahawks. So that's kind of what I've got this week. And then to your point, off season, I will be covering all 32 teams at some point. I usually go in reverse order. So we're going to start with the bad people first. We got to get rid of them so that we can forget about them. And then we can move on towards the new season and get excited about some of these top teams. So that's kind of how I do. Every week will be a little bit different, but I'll have an article and a video every single week.
Don't let your guy Felix know that I'm standing for the Bills to get Leo Chenal as part of this new defensive package here. I know that he's going to.
Oh yeah, I forgot he was part of that. He was the guy that I forgot. Yeah, so you had Herbig, Sanborn, and you had Chenal all on the same team. You had the Becton, and then I think there was another defensive lineman too that was playing as well. So that defensive front, he could do some really funky stuff, and fun. They were really, really fun to watch.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for your time, dude. We always appreciate you over here at Cover One. And for those, we've got a ton of content for you guys. I know Ant did a big thing on it, on Leonard this past week. Greg did a bunch of stuff on the salary cap and the increase in salary cap. So head over here. If you're on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you're getting all of our content. We are ramping up hard for the offseason. We're going to have you guys covered. Everything from salary cap to free agents to the draft. Make sure you're covering all your bases here with Cover One. But on behalf of my friend Cody Alexander, I'm Aaron Quinn. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are